And now we bring in Dr. Doom, Richard Stiennon. We can always count on Richard to scare the pants off us, not literally, but figuratively. And
Well, who
actually,
can tell? I'm only visible from the chest
I
up.
know I'm sitting here in my underwear right now. Who would know, right?
Okay.
So there was a little action that popped last week that caught my attention, and I forwarded it on to Richard, but I'm sure he was on it anyway. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency issued a new emergency directive saying the vulnerabilities in VMware Workspace ONE Access, Identity Manager, and all this other stuff that goes along with that were actually a risk. And you replied to me saying you thought that this was more serious than the last time this happened, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You know, I long time ago learned not to get super excited by new vulnerabilities because there's a new vulnerability every single day, multiple new vulnerabilities.
Seems like, yeah.
And I can remember 20 years ago, I was at Gartner and there was a new vulnerability that allowed remote exploit of any Solaris system. So Solaris, for you youngins in the crowd, was the operating system for Sun Microsystems. And it actually used to own the enterprise right before Windows took over. And so I was at Gartner and I issued a, fast take. Everybody should patch immediately. Well, I started getting calls from CIOs and they said, "You're such an idiot. We have 2,000 Solaris servers. It takes us 2 weeks just to schedule them for downtime. So we take them down and patch them and then bring them back up and test them to make sure we didn't break something. And that's just the scheduling. After 2 months, we're done with the patching cycle. And there's another emergency patch to take care of. So what you're asking us to do is impossible. So just shut up." And I really took that to heart. I just stopped, oh my God, end of the world's coming. You got to be patched or you'll be breached, etc. CISA is still in that exact same mode. And they don't have a lot of power. They do have a lot of input into policy, which is great. And now it's their job to tell everybody, oh my gosh, this one's an important one. Unlike the one the week before in F5 big IP load balancers. So this one is, I totally agree, very, very important. And there's a history with recent VMware vulnerabilities. So to recast it, VMware, of course, is what everybody uses to virtualize their operating systems, right? It was invented to fix the problem with Windows NT versus Solaris. So Unix is by default a multi-user platform. So you can have multiple accounts on it and a whole bunch of people can be using it at once, and it handles that. Windows, as we all know, can only do one thing at a time. And inside the enterprise, they would have Windows, network time protocol servers. And that's all they did. An entire computer, server, $6,000 machine, racked up. All it could do was one thing, or else there'd be memory leaks and it would overflow and it have to be rebooted every 24 hours. Most Windows machines were. So these kids in Finland and Estonia invented a system of virtualized operating system, and every enterprise started creating mini software-only computers in VMs that would run in the data center so that they could have thousands of servers instead of hundreds, each to run its own instance of Windows, so each one could do only one thing. So that's how we got to where we are today. Now everybody uses VMware. It fuels the cloud for all the VMs that you can buy up there. And it's vulnerable. And last April, there were 2 vulnerabilities discovered in it, and VMware issued a patch. Well, the patch fixes a vulnerability. The bad guys who CISA suspects were APTs, in other words, nation states, so Russia and China, re-engineered it and figured out what it was patching. So they found the vulnerability through the public release of the patch and started to exploit it within 48 hours. So they know that there's interest on the part of nation state attackers in VMware vulnerabilities. So when 2 new ones were patched this past Wednesday, CISA issued this warning. And the warning is, pretty dire. It's like, thou must find all the vulnerabilities and patch them by today at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Yeah, I saw that. That's pretty short notice, huh?
Pretty short notice. So, we've probably all had some dealings with the government, even if it's the IRS, and they don't act that fast, right? They just don't have the systems, don't have the people. They're not built for, you got to come in, right? Everybody is unionized. Nobody has to come in and do anything unless they want to. So we'll see if it happens. They are due by 2 p.m. tomorrow to report on all this fantastic activity that they've engaged in for the last week.
So what's the what if? Obviously, they're not going to make these deadlines. So then what happens?
Yeah, they'll just just be told, well, get it going. Same thing happened with the solar winds and the Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities a year and a half ago. They gave everybody a deadline, told them to report immediately, find all the instances and test if they're vulnerable to this particular attack, and then go from there. And that surprisingly, a lot of agencies did meet the deadline, and I'm sure they'll be, by this time they've had that fire drill already, so they hopefully have put in place the processes, incident response processes, in order to recover quickly from these.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. Well, so what is the status of nation state attacks anyway? I haven't heard a lot about them lately, other than Russia attacking some things in Ukraine. But is the network that gives us so much fun in Moscow and St. Petersburg taking a little break from attacking the U.S. these days, or what's going on?
I agree. It does seem like lowered activity, but of course, when you're dealing with spy agencies, you don't see the activity until the effect, and sometimes you never see that either, right? Because even if the NSA discovers it, shuts it down, they don't want to tell us about it, because that will disclose their ability to see things and shut them down. But I have no suspicion that things are stopping in any way.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I've got a theory, because we're going through an economic downturn, or at least stock markets have crashed 50% in tech, and it looks pretty grim out there. And most investors are expecting a downturn in cybersecurity spending as well. And I scratch my head, because cybersecurity spending is not correlated with economic anything, right? It's like an insurance, or beefing up your dikes before a storm. It's things you have to do, and you're going to spend the money on it no matter what. And sometimes there's legal requirements to do it, to be in compliance. So not a lot of discretionary spending on cybersecurity. People aren't, CISOs aren't sitting around going, oh, I'm going to buy a bunch of the new cool tools and try them all out. That just doesn't happen in the modern enterprise anyways. So I started thinking, well, what would cause a downturn in spending? Because the primary driver in the security industry is the threat actors. What would cause a downturn is if the threat actors gave up and went home. Now, usually I facetiously say, well, what's the likelihood of that? Why would they do that? Well, what if Russia collapses? There's a regime change. Putin's out. The new guys want to make nice with the West, and they finally start agreeing to cooperate with international law enforcement. First thing they'll do is they'll roll up all their cybercrime gangs. And ransomware would come to a screeching halt. So there'd be no news announcements. There'd be no pain and agony. Like my book printer suffered in April. My book printers got hit by ransomware, and they've been delaying printing, and took it until last week to get the Chelsea, Michigan plant up and running. Those will all go away if Russia would only crack down. And, once Russia's cracked down, then we can work on the few in the rest of Europe and Asia, and focus just on Northern Korea. We can handle those guys, but it's a little hard to handle cyber criminals who are paying off the government in Russia, or who are getting a piece of the action, or they just liked their action. It's kind of hard to compete with that. So So there could be a recession in cybersecurity spending, which would, of course, be great news for everybody else.
Yeah. Well, certainly the anonymous folks are making it a little tough on Russia these days, right? I've been
Yeah.
reading all these stories about they've been going in and releasing all sorts of interesting stuff, like all the spy data, things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, they got all the Ministry of Defense internal communications and personnel and all that. They're releasing that. And then one of the major news stations, two of the reporters, journalists there fled the country, and then used their access, which had been removed from them, to modify the entire site so that every single story was, made Putin look bad, right?
It was all you were being lied to, and here's what's really happening. And,
it
right.
was all truthful and accurately reported. It was
Yeah.
a little more strongly worded than a newspaper usually has. So for probably 10 or 12 hours, the Russian people could actually see what was going on.
So how many people in Russia do you think are still able to reach Western news sources and social media through VPNs? I know there was a big jump in VPN downloads right after the war started. So.
Yeah, it's going to be the technically savvy people, the same people who are already trying to watch Netflix and stuff.
Because everything's been banned there except YouTube, I guess. So
okay, yeah, and YouTube's can be a good source of information, or getting to GitHub, the way that GitHub lets people build websites in it. Mm-hmm. And even the New York Times started moving articles to it so China citizens could read it. So there's lots of ways. Information, good information and bad information has a way of getting out. It's always up to the individual to interpret it and understand it, to make sense of it. So I'd say 20% of Russians probably still have, unfettered access to the truth. And a lot of other Russians have friends in the West, and they call them up and do Zoom stuff and learn the true stories. So
use WhatsApp, which is encrypted on both ends.
Right. Absolutely. The only people who can read it are Facebook and any of their law enforcement agencies that ask them for access.
Yeah, I know a fair amount of businesses are using WhatsApp these days too, for at least semi-secure communications.
Yeah, better than nothing. Nowhere near as good as Signal. So everybody just use Signal.
Signal. I'm not familiar with Signal. What's Signal?
So Signal was one that was run for a while by Moxie Marlinspike. So speaking of Bitcoin, he's a Bitcoin billionaire because he got a bunch of Bitcoin when they're practically free. And so, now he doesn't have to work for a living, and he's a security and crypto guy, cryptography guy. So he's had been working really, really hard on getting Signal to the point where it was secure. And they introduce ephemeral signaling, so you can send text messages and mark them as, hey, 20 seconds, this is gone forever. Which is, that means if somebody steals your phone, they can't read what you were saying in the past. And then he recently announced he's stepping down. Apparently he's going to get into the world of the metaverse and NFTs and stuff like that. He's sounded like he was saying that this is all bullshit and not worth the time, but then he is looking at it closely. So maybe it's worth looking at. I still am a doubter.
I regret that. Well, I regret many things, but I regret when Bitcoin first came out, you could get it for less than $1, right?
Oh, yeah. 8 cents.
5 cents or so. Hell, if I would have invested $100 in Bitcoin, I wouldn't be working for a living.
Yeah.
But 2020 hindsight, right?
First time I looked at it, it was $6. And I go, that's ridiculous. It was $2 last week. It's going to be $1 the next week. Why would I put money into it?
Yeah. Now it's hovering around $40,000 a pop, or somewhere in that ballpark, right?
Yep.
So, let's talk a little bit about the metaverse. I'm still a little confused on what exactly that is and how secure that is. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, as always, security will be an afterthought. So first, they have to build it into something, right? It's not a huge thing yet. So the way I had the metaverse explained best to me was if you look at some of the modern video games, right? They sell the video game, and then when you're in the game, you can buy badges and extra weapons and stuff like that with fake dollars in the game. But you have to buy the fake dollars with real dollars. So you need your parents'
That's
credit
how
card.
they monetize it. Right?
That's how they monetize it in a huge way, right? Hundreds of millions of dollars for a single game. So just continuous cash for the company. So in the metaverse, a brand like Nike could create, jerseys for your favorite team and offer them for sale on their sites. And you purchase the jersey and your avatar wears it in your game.
Oh.
And then, of course, but that means that all the games have to follow a standard, which of course they won't. Facebook, of course, wants to own the metaverse, and nobody who's involved in any of the games or any of the technology behind it wants Facebook to have any piece of it. So there's a battle royale going on that will prevent them from having that access.
Okay, so I did want to ask you also, I've been hearing a lot of ads lately, and this is the first time I've heard ads for them, for DuckDuckGo. What do you think about that as for use as a browser and its other tools for a home user?
I made the switch 2 years ago to DuckDuckGo.
Yeah.
I hate what Google does with my data with a passion. I don't want them to know what because I'm online all day. I'm researching stuff, and quite often I delve into man-portable nuclear weapons, right? Because I need it for my research. And it's all historical stuff. It's all on Wikipedia and YouTube. But you don't want to be tagged as the person interested in man-portable nuclear weapons.
Not
I think the NSA would love to know that, right?
Yeah, I'm sure they do. Yeah, but I certainly don't want Facebook telling their advertisers about me, right? Because then I'll get ads for guns and
nuclear
whatever.
portable, stuff like that.
Right.
How to build these, right?
Here's exactly. Would you like yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So besides all the things that you research every day, right? You don't, it's kind of annoying when, how often does it happen to you that you have a conversation with somebody about something and you go to sit down at your computer and there's an ad for it? I don't know how they do that. It's spooky, and I assume it's just coincidence, but it is pretty weird. And it, no weirder than the other stuff, right? You're engaged in a discussion about something. And right now I'm getting ads on Reddit and Twitter for all these no-code solutions, because that's, I'm building an app and I'm using no-code, so I'm very interested in that stuff. They know I'm interested in that stuff, so they're feeding me ads to distract me and make me click on them, and sometimes they work.
So getting back to DuckDuckGo, is it, I'm familiar with all the other browsers, but like Matt said, lately they've been really turning up the advertising spend. So you download it I use an Android phone. I use a MacBook because I wanted to have two different technology products.
Right. Me too.
So is it compatible with all that stuff?
Yep. Compatible with all that stuff. Works just like Google. It doesn't have a Google Maps. So you still have to go to Google Maps for all that stuff, because that's kind of hard to do without. But for just everyday searching, it's great. And you can trust the results, because there's I don't think they have paid ads at the top of your search results. So it's great. And they're not tracking you. They're not keeping track of what you search for and what you're interested in buying.
So what's their revenue model? How do they make money on this?
I have no idea. I have no idea.
Yeah, this is from the goodness of their heart, I can assure you. So
yeah, that's it. That's it. And there are others, so DuckDuckGo is a search engine. Brave, is everything bundled in it. It's a privacy browser. Don't forget, with your standard browsers, you can always open a browse privately window, and then your cookies won't be shared. So you can, a very handy thing if you're trying to log into a site that you're currently logged into, and when you're shopping for airplane tickets or something like that, they recognize that you're shopping for airplane tickets, and they see you come back 15 minutes later and check again. You might want to check as a anonymous browser. So you open up a private browsing window and go back to the site, and maybe the prices are more or less. So it's handy.
Yeah, I was looking at airline tickets. I just had my second grandson born in Seattle, and I got to go out there summer.
Congratulations. Wow.
Yeah, and
That's
so I
great.
was looking at tickets a day ago, and then I went in and looked at them again today, and the price went up by $100. So
Yep.
they must know I'm looking, and they're going to try to grab me by that vulnerable place in the mail, right? So
Right. So go to kayak.com
yeah.
and then come back. Now they know you're shopping.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah.
What else is out there that we should be scared of this summer? I mean,
Well,
what's the hot things besides what we just talked about?
yeah, I had talked about the economic downturn, and that's one of the reasons that cybersecurity is kind of immune to recessions, because during any troubling times, the number of attacks goes up. And so you'll see attacks, based on, various money schemes. My intern got one this morning, asking her to buy a $300 Amazon gift card, and they'll pay her $500. So money laundering, right, for the cyber criminals. And the the business email compromises will go up, right, because people will be cutting back and more controls, and the attackers will try and take advantage of that new environment, right? And they'll be laying people off. So a new person might be in charge of wire transfer, for instance. Same with at the banks. So it's going to be a long, hot summer in the cyber realm.
Which is great for guys like you, right?
I guess so.
Sell more yearbooks. Oh, speaking of which, how is the you're saying your Chelsea printer's having problems? Is your new yearbook out then or not?
It's not out. As far as I understand, it's been printed. So that means there's stacks of paper bundled up.
But they have to be bound yet, right?
But it's not bound yet. So that's a special printer that prints color cover. And then they, glue it onto the boards and put it all together magically. It's very cool. But I'm hoping to hear today if that happens and they ship it on Wednesday, and then all of the people who pre-ordered, it's about 10% pre-ordered. So 10% of the books have already been ordered and paid for. Those will go out Thursday. And I'm going to drive to the warehouse where they're fulfilled and sign all the pre-orders. So everybody pre-ordered gets that extra benefit of a signed copy of a collector's item.
Wow. How about that?
What printer do you use? I'm curious because we print magazines here still. So
okay. All right. Yeah, I'm sure Sheridan Books does. So it's Sheridan Books. They are what's left of Michigan's dominant book printing industry. You might remember Edwards Brothers in Ann Arbor. Sheridan bought their plants after they went under and hired most of their people.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so people are still employed because it's a special skill set. It's amazing to see these people handling the big sheets of paper and loading them onto the Heidelberg offset printers. It's really fun.
Okay.
Yeah, I know when we do our alumni magazines here at Lawrence Tech, it's always a fun process to be there on that day too, because they're these huge presses going like 30 or 40,000 pages an hour, and just it's amazing how technical and how specialized that skill set is of those workers that you were talking about.
Yeah, the really cool thing is when they got hit by ransomware, it only took them a couple days to get the offset printers back running because they're not digital. There's there's no files to load, right? It's just images, laser etched into aluminum sheets, and such a cool process. And that's always my advice to people that are digitizing, right? They're moving to the new way of doing things. They're going to save all this money. Keep your old paper systems around, and even, do an exercise with new employees so they know how to handle incoming cash at your store, right? And write receipts on that little tab of paper with the carbon copies. You don't want to have to shut your store down just because your cash register won't open up. And people are probably needing supplies anyways. This is your time to sell stuff to your customers. And just in Ukraine, when they got hit and the power went out, their postal system went back to their old manual systems, overnight. They just kept going. And even their power grid, they just had to deploy people to the power stations and to flip a bunch of switches and move things manually. And in a modern grid, like here in the US, that's all automated and therefore under the control of the attacker.
Jeez.
All right. Well, I feel a lot secure now, but I'm just kidding. So
I'm immediately going to go put the DuckDuckGo extension on my browsers. So
good.
yeah.
Awesome. Choose it as your default,
Yep.
and you'll still get the other one saying, would you like us to be your default? But
yeah.
stick to it.
All right. Well, we're coming down towards the end. This is where you can do your shameless plug there, Richard. Why don't you talk a little bit about your book that you're going to be doing your book signing on Thursday? And I'm sure lots of folks are going to want to get that Security Yearbook 2021 or 2022, which
2022.
Okay.
It's named for the year it comes out, but it covers everything that happened last year in cybersecurity, as well as a history of the industry. So it's the only book written on the history of the industry. So, I interviewed the pioneers of the industry, and then, laid it all out for you. It's only a 25-year history, but I already felt like we were losing, right? Because the companies get acquired and go away every year, and we're losing track of those. So I wanted to become the curator, archivist of all that data. So I put
sounds like an NFT to me. I don't know, but
yeah, there you go. You be happy to sell it to you as an NFT.
Okay.
All right. But because it's got so much valuable data in it, it's going to be very expensive, because you could take the data out of it and compete with me. The way I'm getting around that is I'm launching an app. I did on March 30th. And this is an app to get access to all my data. So, it's Crunchbase for cybersecurity.
Ah, okay.
All
so
right.
anyway, how does one acquire that book? You didn't say.
Oh, go to it-harvest.com and click on shop, and you'll see the 3 editions. So if you're a crazy person, you can buy all 3, and you'll have one of the few complete sets.